start with you guys first. So good.
Caroline,
okay.
Shall I start and give you a break after your keynote? Is that all right? And welcome to the audience. I see Paul and Alice and Malik and Yulin and 17 people on there. So keep the questions coming in. So just to introduce myself, I've got about 10 minutes to start. I'm Rob McCargow. I'm Director of Artificial Intelligence at the consulting company PwC. So we're a professional services firm with 276,000 people, all now working remotely, Caroline, in the space of 2 days. So it's quite a good effort after the lockdown kicked in. My role really involves helping to educate businesses on the impact of artificial intelligence on their operations, to advise governments on the impact of the tech in terms of policy and the way that they can harness that for national growth, but working with regulators, looking at how they're managing the risks of the technology. It's a bit of a long journey to have got here, though. I thought I'd start with a career journey first and then share some thoughts about the highs and the lows of the journey, as Caroline started to set out in her keynote, and maybe share some advice, and then very happy in the course of the session to answer any questions that you might have. But yeah, I grew up as a single parent family. I thought I should be a doctor because my mum was a nurse, and I ended up totally messing up my A-levels and scraped into university and clearing, and ended up doing microbiology, which now in the face of a global pandemic is coming in quite handy to pretend I know what I'm talking about with regards to infectious disease. But it wasn't really a field for me. It wasn't really something that filled my heart with joy. I felt like I'd chosen the course out of necessity rather than love and passion, as Caroline was speaking to in the earlier session. So I fell into the recruitment field, actually, and that was something to keep myself occupied for a period of time. I think one thing leads to another. When you're chasing the money, when you're chasing the bonuses quarter on quarter, you always say, I'll wait another quarter before I work out what I want to do later in life. And before you know it, years and years have gone by. So I ended up, working in the senior executive search field, building executive boards for companies. I then ran my own company, and I'm probably fair to say I was a pretty useless entrepreneur, but I'm pleased I tried it. It was like doing an MBA on steroids. You certainly learn a lot about yourself in that time. But I think one of the things you learn a lot about yourself is failure. And I was having a lot of challenges at the time running my own business. I was doing something I wasn't that passionate about. I was simply doing it really for the money. At the same time, I'd had some challenges in my own life. My mother had passed away, and it was quite a hard time overall. Became a father for the first time. And suddenly, you fail. The business didn't do well. I ended up having to leave it after 3 years. And when you fail for the first time in your life, it's a real knock to your pride. And I think it's something that took me a long time to get over. But for me, the last 6 or 7 years has been quite an interesting process of career reinvention. The first thing I did was I did a coaching course. I then found myself stepping right outside my comfort zone. And I ended up working for an NGO in West Africa during the peak of the Ebola outbreak epidemic in Sierra Leone, in Guinea and Liberia. I was leading HR in the field in West Africa, which was quite an illuminating experience. And you learn a lot about the difference between pressure, which I think is important to sustain your career growth, and stress, which was debilitating and fracturing, the very essence of your confidence. And that was a great experience to really throw yourself out to the deep end. But I was still hankering for something new, and I was trying to find the thing I could get out of bed for in the morning. And 5 years ago, I ended up joining PwC, albeit in a relatively uninspiring sort of ops leadership role. But bit by bit, I sort of moved across to work in the transformation field and helping to drive change management programs. And then there was an opportunity to move into the AI field. And this is something we've invested a huge amount of resource into in the last 4 or 5 years to lead a project on driving it from a sort of a change management, comms, adoption point of view. And then the whole thing just exploded. And I think when you find a sort of a verve in your life and your career, when you find a thread of something that you think you give a damn about, when you realize you're doing something that makes your heart sing, it's amazing what then happens. And I can talk you through the last 4 years quite quickly. It's led me to, I did a TEDx talk. Off the back of the TEDx talk, I've then been invited to speak around the world in the last 2 years, I've been in 25 countries around the world. I've met Hollywood stars. I've spoken to people like Robert De Niro and Harrison Ford. I've had dinner with Princess Anne. I've spoken at the United Nations, and it's just been phenomenal. I've won awards. I've been appointed to 4 or 5 advisory boards, and I think it's so much of it comes down to giving a damn and finding a degree of purpose in your life, and thinking back actually around the issues you face when you realise that you've got to grow your career, and it's not a straightforward linear trajectory of success. People like might look at me, a relatively well-organised bloke with a drum kit and a keyboard behind me and a bookshelf with lots of important tombs and titles on the shelf there, and the shirt I'm wearing for the first time in about 3 months. But for me, I still think back to that moment when I failed, and getting over the fact that I could accept failure, to getting to the point where I could talk about it and now openly celebrate the fact that I failed has been the most important thing I've done in life. And I think for me, it then sustains this drive to want to keep doing something bigger and scarier every single day of the week. So, 4 years ago, I would be petrified to have imagined me talking to a group like this. The last big event I did was at the Excel Centre in February before lockdown, where I did a keynote speech alongside Tim Peake to 4,000 people. So, it's been amazing. So I think the first thing, and it's building upon Caroline's earlier point, is it doesn't really matter. Don't chase money, don't chase prestige, and don't chase things that are, simply there for the materialistic perspective. It's got to be something that I think equates to one thing. When you wake up in the morning, you've got to be thinking about the day ahead and leaping out of bed, running towards it. Maybe there's some days where you're a bit more ambivalent about it. But if you find yourself with days where you're dreading what the day's got in store, where you're petrified about it or you're uninspired about it, you've got to move, you've got to take action. And for me, it's about fulfilling your potential. And I think the guys at Generation Success, James and the team, Alice here, do a brilliant job here. Because potential is one thing, but you've got to execute on your potential, and you've got to link it to something that you care about passionately and deeply. And for me, this whole field around technology, STEM careers, and my particular field in AI is amazing because it cuts across everything that we are doing in society. The ability for us to make sense out of the huge amounts of data coming out of our smartphones and in our lives around us, and using that to improve the world, to help us to find new drugs for things like coronavirus, to help us make our systems more efficient, to improve education access for all, and to make systems smoother and help to improve the ability to reduce our energy consumption and reduce pollution. AI is already showing amazing promise to start solving some of the grandest challenges facing society. And it's been an absolute privilege to be at the heart of this. But it doesn't come without its challenges. So for all the upside, driving economic growth, solving hard problems, making us happier, healthier and wealthier, there is a lot of downside to the technology. And we're starting to see this surface in the press around things like the surveillance culture of people always being monitored. We're looking at big issues in terms of social media, in terms of disinformation, especially around times of the US presidential elections coming up in November and the recent general election here in December. There's particular issues, though, around the people who are empowered to build the technology. And this is a really, really critical point that, I want everyone to sort of take some action on if they find this area a career they want to follow. It's an overwhelmingly white and male field, probably 85% people that look like me. And the particular issue with that, with AI, above and beyond the fact that you've got to have a more equitable access to the right talent, AI has a particular characteristic around it because of the data that we select to train the systems is already exhibiting bias, unconscious bias. And with AI, once you put that into production to start making autonomous decisions about you, whether it's deciding who gets issued a credit or mortgage, whose job application gets progressed through to the interview rounds, who gets sentenced to jail, or who gets let out on probation. All of these decisions, of course, are subject to bias in the real world, but if they're already biased in AI systems, then there's a real risk that these can be amplified and can get out of control and become even more discriminatory. So one of the most practical ways that we can improve this is by diversifying the intake of who's working in the field, so that we can provide AI solutions that benefit all parts of society. We have to have a workforce that's representative of all parts of that society. So for me, I think there's a remarkable number of ways of getting into this. It's a huge growth area. We think it's a sector, touch wood, that's going to survive this difficult period we're facing now. There's much, much greater pressure on organizations now in the years ahead, I think, to find innovative ways of driving efficiencies. And this pushes ahead the automation agenda quite aggressively with the clients that we speak to. And I think it's vital that everyone listening here, if they are interested in this field, find a way of getting into this. So I can answer some questions before I hand on to the next speakers, but in summary, there are quite a few routes in. It doesn't necessarily have to be about being a PhD in data science, an amazing whiz on mathematics, a hardcore software engineer. I've got people in my team that are lawyers that come into it from a sort of data protection angle. I've got an ethics expert, an ethicist in my team that can ask the questions about whether or not this is an appropriately configured project to minimize things like bias and discrimination. I've got communications experts that can explain to our workforce how we're implementing these tools that are dealing with their personal data, and a whole host of other skill sets. So it's not about just being a hardcore techie. Careers in STEM, and I think Caroline was making that point in her opening remarks there. So for me, I think there's a lot of jammed into about 10 minutes there. Focus on something that you give a damn about. Wake up in the morning looking forward to your day at work. Don't worry about the materialistic or the financial aspects too much. That will look after itself in due course if you're focused on the right thing. But most of all, try to do things that scare you every day. And I would never be in this privileged position that I'm here to apparently sort of bestow my wisdom upon you. I don't often think I'm qualified to do that. But I would never be here if I hadn't have taken some risks, made myself uncomfortable, put myself at, often in a position of fear, if anything, because I think through those periods of time, that's when you know you grow and you expand your repertoire and you meet amazing people, and one thing leads to another. So for me, celebrate your failures, take risks, grow, do something every week that makes you scared, and focus on your passions, and think about that moment in the morning when you wake up. Am I leaping out of bed, grabbing this day by the scruff of its neck, or am I dreading the day? If it's the latter, do something about it. Thank you.